Joining us now on the program is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic, for our weekly mental health talk. Carrie, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on as we are recognizing Groundhog Day this week. This morning, Punxsutawney Phil seeing his shadow, 6 more weeks of winter, but also plenty of more time to focus on our mental health. And as we recognize Groundhog Day, let's talk today about grounding ourselves with our mental health, especially when we're experiencing some of the recurring traumas that can often cause us a lot of stress and other problems day to day. So when we talk about grounding, define that for us and what it means to ground our mental health.
Sure. There's sort of 2 different forms of exercises or therapeutic interventions that involve grounding. One is a mindfulness practice. When we're feeling anxious, we are preoccupied with the future, and all of our thoughts and feelings are oriented in the future. When we're depressed, often our thoughts are preoccupied with the past, with guilt, with regret, with unpleasant feelings about things that have happened before. Also, you mentioned trauma. Trauma is another thing that can take us both directions, right? Recurring thoughts of things that have happened to us in the past and a lot of dread for the future. Grounding is a way to orient ourselves in the present, to orient our mind, our thoughts, our feelings, and to sort of clear the brain of these excess or irrational thoughts, and really just clean it and trim it down to what's presently in front of us. Additionally, there's another form of grounding that is beneficial, but also a little more scientific, but it's really about aligning the cells in our body with the charges of the earth. As an industrialized nation, we probably don't get enough fresh air, skin to the ground, bare feet to the ground time. And science is showing there's some real physical health, but also mental health benefits to those practices.
And so when we are in these sort of situations where we're feeling some of those emotions that may be associated with anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, or just memories coming back that maybe aren't the greatest memories, then something jogs that and brings it back to the surface. Where do you start in that grounding technique, in grounding? Because these can come on at any time and from any situation, and it's not necessarily something that someone's going to immediately recognize as I'm having some sort of an episode with a repressed memory and I need to ground myself. So what is that first step that people should take?
Sure. So I'm going to, like I said, there's 2 distinct forms of grounding. So I'm going to start with the first, which is the mindfulness practice of grounding. The technique that's the most famous and most widely used, most recommended by therapists is called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. So in this technique, you use your body's senses, sight, smell, taste, touch, and you go through them. You can do any order that you want, but you'll find there's some easier than others. If you start with 5 things I see. That's usually the easiest one. So you can look around your surroundings, your physical space. What do you see? It may be, certain I see this vase, or I see my table, I see this painting. So you go through 5 things you see. And then from that, you'll move to 4. What are 4 things you feel? I can feel the softness of my sweater. I can feel the back of my chair on my back. I feel my earbuds in my ears. So 5 things you see, 4 things you feel. Then you might go to 3 things I hear. So, I can hear someone running water in another room. I can hear the sound of your voice. I can hear the sound of my voice. Next might be smell. So what are 2 things I smell? I can smell my cup of coffee. I can smell an air freshener in this room. And last thing, taste, right? I can taste this coffee. I can taste the remainder of toothpaste from this morning. But that once you've gone systematically through all of your senses, you'll find you're further away from all of those anxious thoughts. So if you think of anxious or distressing thoughts as like taking us into a dream or a nightmare, kind of out of this world, grounding brings us back down.
And so just how is this effective in tempering some of these different anxieties or the recurring post-traumatic stress that someone may be experiencing commonly when they're using these grounding techniques? How does that work to kind of bring them back down from the height of that anxiety they may be experiencing to that grounded level, thus the name of it?
Well, there's a couple different interactions at place. One is that it's exceptionally hard for us to think and feel at the same time. So if we're feeling all stirred up, if we're feeling emotional and anxious, our thoughts are not that rational. So rational thought and all of that irrational feeling don't likely happen at the same time. When we start thinking, even really simple exercises, there's some ways to even approach this, say, for example, children during a temper tantrum, is that if you ask them a question, what color is my shirt? What color is your cup? Things that are sort of easy to answer, it's kind of hard for them to continue to think and feel about whatever had worked them up. So it helps bring us back to a little bit more rational place in our mind, and also without doing it too strenuously, right? Because if it was too hard to answer a question, we would just become emotionally flooded again. So it is a way to just restore some easy, rational thinking. Also, it serves to clean it out, just like I used. It just takes those irrational thoughts and makes them not so important in our mind. It moves them to the back burner, and then we're thinking about things that are, like I said, very easy, calm, not too difficult for us to handle.
We're joined by Carrie Krawiec on today's edition of the Megacast from the Birmingham Maple Clinic, our weekly mental health talk with Carrie on Thursday mornings on the program. You can see all those on our website, civiccentertv.com/megacast, and join us each Thursday morning for our talks with Carrie Krawiec from the Birmingham Maple Clinic. More information on their website, birminghammaple.com as well. And Carrie, timing is really important on this too, because especially with anxiety and even with post-traumatic stress and the anxiety that brings on in a completely in a different way, but also a similar way to generalized anxiety, the more time that goes by, it tends to be that sort of piles up and keeps intensifying. So getting into these grounding techniques quickly, I would imagine, makes them, if not more effective, then prevents from severe anxiety coming into play and leading to some other more detrimental outcomes. But sometimes that timing may not be right in the situation somebody's in their daily life. So what suggestions do you have then if someone's beginning to feel some of those anxieties coming on or the post-traumatic stress coming back and taking effect, to get into those grounding techniques, especially if they're in the middle of the work day, or they're in a meeting or some other situation where those techniques may not necessarily be something someone can immediately engage in?
Sure. Well, one of the most beneficial things about this grounding technique is that you don't need anything with you but yourself. So, and you can do it completely inside your own mind. You don't necessarily have to talk to somebody about it. So that those things make it, much easier to apply in any scenario. But you're absolutely right. Once a person has reached a panicked state, any kind of breathing, mindfulness technique, calming technique are much harder to apply. Imagine the value of working out daily versus like needing to run away from a lion if you were being chased, right? Is that the best case scenario is that the routine practice is something you do early and often so that you feel comfortable to apply it in a time of need. So that being said, regular practices, regular breathing exercises during periods of calm, regularly using the grounding exercise, doing mindfulness, even meditation, something like 90 seconds of meditation a day is proven to improve mood and reduce anxiety. Having those practices daily will help make them that much more easy to access during a time of high stress, high anxiety, panic or other forms of emotional distress.
And you mentioned, too, the interaction with the outdoors or with nature can also be a very effective grounding tool also. What are your suggestions on that? And just how, and also go into some details on why that is so effective in helping to ground us also when we're in these sorts of moments of anxiety.
So this is new and very understudied science that's just gaining traction now. And there is some overlap, but what they're discovering is, obviously we know in our industrialized society, we have higher, depression and anxiety than we have ever had in history. And what they're connecting it to is that we are not as connected to our earth, physically touching the ground of the earth. And this isn't about grounding just this experience of touching it. It's really about the electrical charge, right? Like, so when you hear about grounding, like in terms of electricity, it's the same idea, right? That we can align the electricity in our bodies with the electricity of our earth, and that there's benefits to health, cardiovascular health, reduction in pain, length of life, and improvements in mood and anxiety. What I think is especially cool about this is there's a way to blend both forms of grounding. Now, I know right now we're in Michigan and we don't have access perhaps to our grass, or, it's not safe to necessarily lay barefoot, skin to the ground. But that doing exercises when we are able to immersion in water, touching grass with our bare hands or bare feet, laying down on the ground, these are things that would help our electrical charge align with the earth. But also you could approach those grounding exercises. Do you feel the texture of the grass on your hands or feet? Can you feel the temperature of the water? So can you see the color of the grass? Can you see the color of the water? There is a way, when we're eventually able to here in Michigan, to use the 5-4-3-2-1 technique simultaneously with physical touch of the earth. In the meantime, there are other implements. There are grounding mats, grounding blankets, grounding patches. So there are things you can buy to have a daily sort of electrical grounding experience. But of course, incorporating time outdoors is always going to be beneficial for mood for multiple reasons, both biological and emotional.
And Carrie, you mentioned this earlier, you touched on this briefly earlier, but I'd like to get a little more detail on it too, because you can ground when you're feeling these feelings of anxiety or recurring post-traumatic stress to help calm yourself down a little bit and get out of some of those more stressful, acute stressful situations. But you also mentioned that just 90 seconds of meditation a day can have significant benefits on your mood and on your stress levels overall. So is it better to put these grounding techniques into use when you're feeling those anxieties, or to do that in advance, maybe to potentially prevent some of those situations of anxiety or post-traumatic stress recurring from being as severe?
Absolutely, right? That I think both. I think the routine practice helps on multiple levels. One, it helps create neural pathways in the brain so that those anxious thoughts aren't even as frequent or as present. The road most traveled in our mind, or the road quickest traveled, is the road most traveled. So our neural pathways, if we have routinely thinking negatively, either about the past or the future, then anything we experience shoots down our neural highway in a negative way. So doing something routinely calming, even when you're not in stress, just provides another pathway, an alternate route, so that when something happens to us at any point in our life, we don't just shoot down the worst case scenario highway. We have other paths. It's like using Waze or something. We have other avenues that our brain can go down. So the more neural pathways that you create, the more opportunities to divert those negative thoughts you're going to have. Also, it becomes very familiar and accessible. Like I said, the difference between running on a treadmill every day and then being able to run when you need to for your safety, having that routine behavior makes the comfort so that oh, I know what to do right now. It just makes it that much more easy to grab the tool when you need it than if you are completely unfamiliar.
We're joined by Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic, on today's edition of the Megacast. You can find them on their website, birminghammaple.com, or call them 248-646-6659, 248-646-6659 for more information and for consultation. Carrie, beyond these grounding techniques that you mentioned, going out into nature and connecting with the earth, and of course the 5-4-3-2-1 technique that you mentioned earlier on, are there any other techniques that you would suggest for people that may be feeling these acute anxiety episodes or recurring post-traumatic stress that may be able to help them, especially in those moments where that anxiety is heightening?
Sure. I mean, I think just an abbreviated version of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique is called 5 blue things. It could be 5 red things, 5 green things. It could be anything you want. It's also especially useful for children. My son, after the pandemic leading into in-person school, was very anxious about going to school, and we would do 5 blue things on our drive in the morning. I see a blue trash can, I see a blue coat, I see a blue car, but that in that moment we spent our time not talking about how anxious we were about our school day, but just looking for certain colors in the world, helped to just get us in the right place to get through the door. Also, I mean, there's dozens and dozens of different breathing exercises, yogic breathing, different other relaxation breathing. There's YouTube videos that do some guided breathing and guided meditation. Having some of those breathing practices on hand are also helpful. One, they reduce the likelihood of panic. They improve blood flow and stress hormones throughout the body. But at the same time, then they also become more accessible when you need them. If you start to pant or hyperventilate or struggle, to have the reminder that you have some strength and skill at some breathing exercises makes it that much more easy to apply in those distressing moments, which we all have.
248-646-6659. You can also send Carrie and the team an email at info@birminghammaple.com for more information. Carrie, anything else on grounding or on relieving anxiety and acute post-traumatic stress that we haven't discussed yet today that would be important for our audience to consider?
I think that this topic was just so fun to be able to talk about grounding on Groundhog Day. And so, right, and I love the way you led into it, right? That like Groundhog Day, we have that vision of Bill Murray and this recurring nightmare he's in, right? And it just that for people to make this connection, to think if you're ever in recurring thoughts, recurring obsessive thoughts, recurring distressing thoughts, grounding is there for you, and you'll be able to shift gears and get out and move on to the next space healthfully.
Yeah, it's something to get your mind off of those things that are triggering that anxiety just enough to relieve it, so that you can use your other coping mechanisms to then recover afterward. Carrie, thank you so much for your insight and for joining us again today.
Always, thank you for having me.